Hey guys, in today's video I'm going to show you how we build the HB diff into the case and how we shim it. There's been a bit of a change in what some of our team drivers are doing, just for a bit of longevity and durability. Basically, instead of having 1.2 mil shim on the pinion like this, push right up against it, then the bearing, then the other bearing, then another 0.2 mil shim here, then your C-clip. We've done away with these little shims on the pinion itself. They're just troublesome. If you land on power, you can force this sharp back edge of the gear. You can force that into the shim itself and it can chew the shim up. Then once the shim's chewed up, it'll either go through your ring and pinion and make a mess, or it will fall out, go free, but then you've got all this extra slop. The pinion will move away from the ring gear and you can skip. If you start skipping, eventually you'll chip a tooth and just generally just wear out your ring and pinion. So we're all about reliability and making things a bit cheaper. So what we've done is, instead of using these two little piddly shims, these little guys here, they're outdrive shims, these two guys, we've got one to shim the bearing. Now, some people, the kit tells you to put one on the inside here up against this edge, then through the bearing, through the other bearing, then the other shim. These are 0.2 of a millimeter thick, they're pretty thin, but that plus that is 0.4 of a millimeter, and it's just too tight. If you run both of them, it doesn't let your drivetrain be free. But there is a little bit of float. There's a little bit too much end float with just one. So I was running just one on the inside, just one right up against here. But there was a little bit of end float. Not too bad, but too much for my liking. So some of the top racers here have been doing this little swap around for a little while, and they've come up with a number of 0.3 of a millimeter. So enter this guy. This is a 21mm OD, 15mm ID, 0.3 mil shim. Now what we do is, instead of putting this little shim here, we're now going to space out the large bearing, the 21mm OD bearing. So when we put our bearing into the case, instead of putting it straight in, we're actually going to put this shim in here first. That's going to do our shimming for us. 0.3 of a mil, it will space out the pinion and the bearing. So the pinion will actually sit right flush hard up onto the bearing. There's nothing there that can get munched up. That shim is safely tucked away in between the case and the bearing. Bulletproof. So put our bearing in there. It's a new case, they can be pretty tight. It's in there. Just small bearing on the outside. So now, if you want to change your pinion or do anything with your pinion, you don't even have to worry about the shim. The shim's locked in there behind the bearing. You only have to worry about it if you take the bearing out to replace it, or grease it, or oil it, or do whatever you want to do. That goes on there like that. There's nothing to mess around with on the outside except your C-clip, which I'll probably struggle to put that on the camera. We'll see. See if I'm having a good day or a bad day. That's on. There's the slightest little bit of end float, but there's 0.1 of a mil less end float than what you would have with one shim. There's 0.1 of a mil end float more than what you would have with 2.2 shims. So we're pretty happy with how that sits there. Being that this is a new diff, I'm going to use one outdrive shim opposite the ring gear side, so just on there. Now this is going in an e-buggy. You can put these either way. I generally work it out that I try and put it the same way as my nitro, and I run my motor in reverse rotation. It's just a bit easier, just in case you're doing this in a rush. You stick the diff in backwards. It's not much fun. That's basically together now. I'll do this off camera. I'll run the screws in, and then I'll show you what to feel for. Okay, so I've run those two screws into the D block, these two screws into the top, just to keep the case all together. Now we can check to see how our shimming is. So put a finger against the pinion. Now you'll just double check that you've got a little bit of end float, which we do. Put your finger against the pinion so it's pushed all the way in. Perfect. You just want a little tick. Now these are completely dry, there's no grease on these gears. Just a little tick tick sound. If it's a lot, if it's clonk 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 clonk, it's probably shim too loose. You might need to take one away, take the shim away from this side, put it on this side. It'll push the ring gear closer towards the pinion, and that will tighten up your mesh. But this is perfect. It's nice and free. There's almost no effort in turning that at all, and there's not even any grease in there yet. The idea with that shim works great. Give it a try. If you're in Australia and you want to try a couple of shims, shoot me a message on Facebook, and I'm happy to just send you some shims, just at the cost of postage. I bought 100 of them, so any of the HB guys that are around, especially in Melbourne, just hit me up. I'll give you a couple of spares or whatever.